The aftermath of 116th Street had left Harlem changed. Mitch the King was finished. His organization had crumbled. His soldiers had scattered or switched sides. The man who had once controlled half of Harlem was now a ghost, hiding somewhere in the city, waiting for the inevitable. Frank Lucas had won. That was the story everyone told. Frank had outmaneuvered, outfought, and outlasted his rival. The territory that had been divided was now unified under one name, Frank's name. But victory, Frank would learn, often attracts more dangerous enemies than defeat. The attention that the street war had generated did not go unnoticed. People were watching. People who operated on levels that made Harlem's street conflicts look like children fighting over toys. Some of these people saw Frank as a threat. An ambitious young man who had risen too fast, accumulated too much power, and shown too little respect for the established order. Others saw him as an opportunity, a potential partner, a way into markets and territories they had never been able to access. Both groups would make their presence known on the same night, the night that Lenox Avenue burned. Lenox Avenue was the heart of Frank's operation. It was not just one location, but a network of businesses, properties, and corners that stretched for blocks. The revenue generated from this single avenue was more than most legitimate businesses saw in a year. Losing Lenox Avenue would not just hurt Frank financially, it would destroy the perception of his power. And in the streets, perception was everything. The attack came 3 weeks after 116th Street. Frank had been careful. He had increased security. He had varied his routines. He had prepared for retaliation from Mitch's remaining loyalists. What he had not prepared for was an assault from outside Harlem entirely. They came from downtown, not Mitch's people, not anyone Frank had ever dealt with before. These were professionals, organized, well-funded, moving with a precision that spoke of military training or something very much like it. They hit 3 locations simultaneously: a numbers operation on 127th Street, a supply depot near 125th Street, and the main counting house on Lenox Avenue itself. The coordination was perfect. Each location was struck at exactly 9:15 in the evening. Before anyone could warn the others, before Frank could respond, 3 pillars of his operation were under attack at once. Frank received the news in fragments, phone calls that cut out mid-sentence, runners arriving with breathless, incomplete reports. Something was happening, something big, something that did not fit any pattern he had seen before. He made the decision that would define the night. Instead of staying safe, instead of letting his men handle it, Frank got in his car and drove toward Lenox Avenue. His lieutenants argued against it. This was exactly what the attackers would want. Draw Frank out into the open, make him vulnerable. But Frank understood something his lieutenants did not. If Lenox Avenue fell while he hid in safety, it would not matter if he survived. His reputation would be destroyed, his men would lose faith, his enemies would smell weakness and circle like wolves. Sometimes leadership meant taking risks that made no logical sense. Lenox Avenue, when Frank arrived, was chaos. Storefronts had been broken into. His people were scattered, trying to regroup against an enemy they could not identify. The counting house was surrounded by dark vehicles Frank did not recognize. Frank did not rush in. He parked 3 blocks away and watched, assessed, calculated. What he saw told him this was not a robbery. The attackers were not taking money or goods. They were destroying, burning records, smashing equipment, sending a message. This was not about profit. This was about power. Someone wanted Frank Lucas removed from the game entirely. Frank's men began to rally. Word spread that the boss was nearby, that he had come personally, that he was not hiding. Soldiers who had been retreating started to hold their ground. Reinforcements arrived from other parts of Harlem. The tide began to turn. What followed was 4 hours of running conflict across a dozen blocks of Harlem. Not one large battle, but a series of small engagements. Frank's men pushing back against the invaders, corners changing hands multiple times, the sounds of conflict echoing through neighborhoods that had not seen this level of chaos in decades. Frank moved through it all like a general on a battlefield. He did not fight directly. That was not his role. But he was there, visible, making decisions, deploying men where they were needed. His presence transformed the morale of his soldiers. They were fighting for something now, fighting for someone. By 1 in the morning, the attackers began to withdraw. Their mission, whatever it had been, was not accomplished. They had damaged Frank's operation, but not destroyed it. They had sent their message, but received a clear response. Harlem was not an easy target, and Frank Lucas was not a man who could be intimidated into submission. The dawn came slowly that morning. Frank stood on Lenox Avenue surveying the damage. The counting house had been badly damaged but not destroyed. The records were gone, burned to ash, but records could be reconstructed. The real losses were harder to quantify. Men injured, trust shaken. The sense of security that his people had felt completely shattered. Frank's most trusted lieutenant approached him as the sun climbed over the brownstones. "Boss, we need to find out who did this. I have been asking around. Nobody knows these people. They are not from any crew we have dealt with before." Frank nodded slowly. He had been thinking the same thing. The precision of the attack, the resources required, the willingness to take on an established Harlem operation directly. This was not street-level competition. This was something else entirely. "I think I know who we need to talk to," Frank said quietly. The lieutenant looked confused. "Who?" Frank did not answer immediately. He was thinking about the social club on the Lower East Side. The men he had met there months ago, the deal they had made, the connections they represented. If anyone would know who had attacked Lenox Avenue, it would be them. And if they did not know, that would tell Frank something even more important. The conversation that followed, in a back room of that same social club where Frank had first proved his boldness, would reshape everything. The old man who had first taken Frank seriously listened to the account of the attack with an expression that shifted from interest to concern to something that looked almost like anger. "These people," the old man said finally, "they are not from our world, not from any organization I recognize, but I have heard rumors, whispers about a new group trying to establish themselves." Frank leaned forward. "Who are they?" The old man shook his head. "I do not know yet, but I intend to find out. What I can tell you is this. They did not just attack you last night. They attacked the arrangement we made. They attacked our interests." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. "That makes this our problem too." When Frank left the social club that morning, he had something he had not expected. Allies. Powerful allies who saw the attack on Lenox Avenue as an attack on their own position. "The enemy of my enemy," as the saying went. But alliances came with obligations, debts that would eventually need to be paid. Frank understood this. He accepted it. In the game he was playing, you could not stand alone forever. The question was always who you chose to stand with. Back in Harlem, the rebuilding began. Frank's operation was damaged but not broken. The attack had cost him money, resources, and men. But it had also shown something important. When pushed to the limit, Frank Lucas and his organization had pushed back. They had survived. The mysterious attackers had expected to find a street operation that would collapse under pressure. What they had found instead was something harder, something more resilient, something that would remember this night and prepare for the next one. The identity of the attackers would remain a mystery for weeks, but when the truth finally emerged, it would be more complicated and more dangerous than Frank could have imagined. These were not just rivals, they were representatives of a changing world, a world where the old rules were breaking down and new powers were rising. Frank Lucas would have to evolve to survive. He would have to become something more than just the king of Harlem. The night Lenox Avenue burned was not an ending. It was a transformation, the beginning of a new chapter in Frank Lucas's story, a chapter that would test everything he had built and everyone he trusted. Next time on Frank Lucas Chronicles, the men from North Carolina, Frank's country boys, the soldiers he trusted with his life. When they came face to face with the Italian mob, loyalties would be tested, and not everyone would survive the encounter. That story is coming in Part 7.